So I'm constantly going, no, stop that, put that down, don't touch that, take that out of your mouth. The vendors are trying to define the problem space as the problem they can solve.
Maybe I'm not visionary enough.
Damn it, Jerry. That's some fine advanced intelligence work there, Lou. That's nation-state level shit right there.
Oh my god. Alright, you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Alright, here we go. Today is Tuesday, October 7th, 2014. And this is episode 87 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. I hope you're doing well, sir.
Fantastic, and likewise, welcome back to civilization.
It's true. I fled south for some sun and beach and jellyfish and stingrays, according to the sign.
Great. Well, welcome back.
None attacked me. This could also be because I flee from the sun and, sizzle rapidly, so I wasn't in it too much.
Got it. It's hard to work on the laptop when you're out in the sun, right?
That's true.
All right, so the first topic we had tonight was just to recap our time at DerbyCon, as we promised last week.
And a fine time it was.
It was a great time. I would say, bar none, and I think we mentioned it last time, my favorite talk was the one on incident response put on by the GE team. And, by the way, there's way more talks that you can ever possibly attend, so I still am in the process of going through and watching the videos. And if you're interested, I definitely encourage the listeners here to go watch some of them. And by the way, there was the whole bad USB thing that's going around was, dropped at DerbyCon. So,
and to be fair, not every talk is a hit, right? So just to warn the listeners, some of them that you watch are not necessarily the most exciting, enlightening. There's some we don't agree with. So, but there's a lot of good ones. And yeah, the one from GE was really rocking. To be completely transparent, the presenters were maybe not the most dynamic. Clearly, they had not presented often in front of a crowd, which is understandable. But the information they presented was incredibly solid and really interesting.
Yeah, all about the content on that one, for sure. And by the way, I think the converse was also true. There were a number of speakers who were really engaging and very, very charismatic, but really didn't have a great story to tell.
This is true. I myself participated in slideshow roulette, where you get a random, unprepped, unseen PowerPoint slide deck, and you need to make it interesting, and I didn't even make it past the first round. So, clearly, as dynamic and engaging as I am, I failed.
Well, in your defense, you went first, and you didn't have the opportunity to pick up on the vibe that the way to win is through sexual innuendo.
That's true.
But,
That's true.
Yeah, whatever. You'll know it for next time.
That's right.
So then we had a listener meetup, which was pretty cool. We had, I think, about half of our listeners there. At least.
Well, are we counting immediate family?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously my parents weren't there, so.
Right. And the coma patients were not there.
That's true, too.
Inmates, not there.
No inmates.
So, of those who listen voluntarily who are not incarcerated and are not direct family, half our listener base.
Yeah, I did hear about what they're doing with our podcast at Gitmo, and that was really unfortunate to hear.
I like to think we're contributing to national security.
Whatever. So anyhow, we it was really awesome to meet.
It was
so many good people. Thank you to all of you who were there. Great meeting you. Hopefully, we get to meet again soon.
Absolutely. I learned to pick my first lock at DerbyCon. That was exciting. They have a lockpick village.
Yes.
Jerry, on the other hand, is far more experienced.
I love picking locks. That was that is probably one of my favorite parts of DerbyCon. Actually, sitting down and just being in a room full of locks that you are intended to pick. Normally, you have to worry about that sort of thing.
And it wasn't me hand delivering you tasty Starbucks treats then.
Well, that was also good.
Yeah.
So, yes. Thank you, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No problem. But what else? What else did we see? I saw less talks than I wanted to see, unfortunately. The parties were pretty cool. The vibe is cool. I would say I probably had more enjoyment and got more value out of the hallway conversations than even some of the talks, which is an odd thing to say. But LobbyCon and HallwayCon was excellent and met a lot of really cool people. And, one thing I will say that the podcast has done for me, at least, is really open the door to a lot more meeting and speaking with people that I probably would not have had the opportunity otherwise. So that is something that, this podcast has been great for, and I thank you for that. So that's cool. I really dig that. And we got a chance to do a 3-way podcast.
Yeah, which we still don't have the audio for.
Oh, well.
Whatever.
Details.
Yeah, we gotta get on that.
Let's see. What other good talks did you see that you want to mention?
None come to mind right now. The GE one just was so far and away the most interesting to me. Again, like you, I didn't go to a ton, and I'm still going through the videos right now.
What about the AD defense one? What do you think about that?
Well, that isn't actually a very good talk. I had actually seen that talk given at, I didn't go there. I watched the video of that person whose name escapes me right now, presented it at, I believe it was B-Sides Augusta.
Ah.
And so it was basically the same thing, which it, by the way, is a really very good talk, but just wasn't new to me when I sat there and watched it. So didn't know it at the time when I went in there that I had already seen it. So again, it's definitely worth watching if you have an AD shop. I highly recommend it.
Good.
And just so you know, one of the key themes there was if you are an Active Directory shop, you number one, you want to minimize the number of domain admins for obvious reasons, but two is you really want to make sure you have a level of trust with the people who you're granting that authority to. So he talks a lot about that. So anyhow, good stuff. I'll put a link to the stream of YouTube videos from DerbyCon, and you can watch away. I mean, it'll take you days to get through them all. So, having said that, by the way, I'm definitely intending to go back, and I will also say it has inspired me to start putting together some talks, and we talked about that, and we'll probably be doing some jointly.
It's true, which means you'll do all the work, and I'll just add some color commentary and take half the credit.
That sounds about right. Just like the podcast.
Just like the podcast. Hey, if the formula works, why change it?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, moving on. Our first story tonight is from Tripwire. And the title is AT&T discovers second insider breach this year. And the story here is that 1,600 customers were recently notified by AT&T that an employee improperly accessed details, customer details, including names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers. I mean, nothing of consequence, CPNI information. And apparently they have also discovered that some of it has been misused, although they're not really saying what that means. Having said that, though, they actually had earlier in the year another episode where 3 employees had accessed records of other customers, and the intention there was to impersonate those customers to obtain unlock codes for phones. So it's not clear to me if they were trying to unlock phones that were stolen, or there's some missing details I don't have. But the thing that strikes me, and we've talked a little bit about this, is that I think there's not enough focus on the problem of business logic. And I've seen this on a number of occasions in previous lives and previous employers, where, especially in like support type organizations, where anybody can get to any customer information. And the reality is, especially if you're tracking things that are sensitive, like social security numbers, driver's licenses, or any number of other potential things that could be damaging, you really want to implement some kind of a need to know restrictions. So you can only get to that customer information if you happen to be working on a case for that customer and have some kind of a separation of duties type of construct where you can't assign yourself a ticket or that sort of thing. Obviously it's not airtight, but it's probably a lot better than having someone root through 1,600 customer records.
Yeah, it's interesting. The tough part is we don't know really any details about how this insider did anything, how they were detected, what they did, but we can make some suppositions, right? And I agree with you. There's a lot of times that we don't monitor what our insiders are doing, and sometimes that's malicious and intentional, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a third party that has snuck some sort of malicious code onto that desktop or laptop or whatever it may be of that insider. And I think either way, monitoring that behavior is important, especially if it's key customer data. I know this stuff gets spread around a lot, but at least take a data-centric view of watching who's accessing and how and why they're accessing that data, and does it match up with normal behavior.
Yeah, and if you're adept at doing that, you're going to catch either a malicious employee or the case where the person's workstation's been compromised and is being used by some external actor. So I think that's good advice. I do think though that some of these systems aren't designed from the maybe not from the ground up, right? But they're not really designed to compartmentalize and isolate information in a way that makes sense in the current world. And that's I think that's probably something that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that may be something that going forward people would design in that concept a little better, hopefully. But especially with some of these big old companies, they probably don't have any concept of that didn't when they put these things together initially. So that's a very good point.
You saying AT&T is old?
Yes. Well, I'm sure their IT, especially for big customer records, is probably fairly fairly mature.
Yeah.
And it's probably incredibly costly and difficult then for them to change things on these huge old monolithic databases. But nonetheless, here we are.
Thus is the hell of IT.
One other thing I found interesting was that the reason this was disclosed was because of Vermont, oddly enough. Vermont has laws for data breach notification, so they had to send a letter to the Vermont Attorney General.
Yeah, and that is becoming more and more interesting of a landscape. Each state, I think there's, last count, there was 42, I believe, 42 states that have different levels of data breach notification requirements. And it's kind of a landmine, landmine field, right? So you need some kind of counsel to help you get through that, and it's becoming more perilous, I think.
Business plan idea: data breach notification outsourcing.
That's a great idea. We'll take the fall for you.
Well, we track the ever-changing laws of the 51 states and territories of the United States and know exactly what must be done for every breach notification. And you can manage it all through our handy portal.
Just upload your data.
Right, all of it.
and we'll figure it out for you.
But in all seriousness, that's got to be a massive pain to keep up with all of that from each of the individual states. Yeah,
and I'll tell you, I'm pretty sure there are a number of innovative law firms out there who are offering that kind of service, obviously not like a software as a service type of thing, but I think this is becoming a legal, something that the legal profession is starting to really pay attention to.
Fair enough.
So the next story we have is just all kinds of epic wonder and fail and everything else in between. So Yahoo, and by the way, this story is like developing as we're talking. So Yahoo yesterday was accused by this person named Jonathan Hall, who is apparently the senior engineer and president of a security company. And I first read this, I think, when I was the company's name, by the way, is Future South Technologies. I was reading this he posted it on Reddit. That I think was his initial point of disclosure. He apparently was pretty frustrated. His allegation is that a couple of Yahoo servers were subscribed to a botnet via an attack through Shellshock. And he writes quite a lot of hoopla about his trials and tribulations with contacting Yahoo and them not taking him seriously. And finally, he had to email and tweet Marissa Mayer, who is the CEO of Yahoo, before anything actually happened. And so that is interesting, but not where it ends. The next part of the story is that the CISO of Yahoo, Alex Stamos, responds on Hacker News and has subsequently given a number of interviews and flatly refuses the charge that this was the result of shell shock. And in fact, it was the result of a script that had parsed some data that the attackers had sent, which apparently just so happened to trigger in the same way that shell shock would have triggered. And so Mr. Hall, in turn, replies that that's essentially a crock of shit. And basically that's kind of like winning the lottery. What is the likelihood that somebody could get that lucky to trigger something in a custom written script? And and just kind of tit for tat, back and forth. The net of it is, I really think both sides are kind of being idiots about this. To be blunt, I really think, having read what Mr. Hall has written, that let me say this very diplomatically, he may not understand everything about enterprise security and enterprise IT architecture to the level that he believes he does. So he goes on quite a few rants and tangents about the servers have 10.RFC 1918 addresses, which is not uncommon in the context of a very large ISP where your actual servers are sitting behind, some kind of a reverse proxy load balancer type setup. So that, that was one thing. Another was, in a very recent report, Alex Stamos said that, he and his team had looked through their stack for evidence of this breach, and Mr. Hall really kind of went off on that, and it said that this was not a buffer overflow, had nothing to do with the stack, and pointed him to other places to look for malware, and unfortunately totally missed the point that stack in that context is not talking about CPU registers and things like that. It's talking about the layers of software that you are running on your platform. It's kind of a enterprise IT generic term that is used. Anyway, I gotta say, here's my thought on this. I think Yahoo, if it had been shell shock, would have been way better off just saying it was shell shock. Because everybody and their dog right now knows about shell shock and on and on and on, right? And I think if they would have said that, nobody would have batted an eye. For whatever it's worth, That's just my view. And instead, they came out with this, what is being described commonly as kind of a cockamamie story about a script. But I think it's possible, however horrifying, that this is actually true.
Sure, why not?
So if you have it's not difficult to think, right? The method by which shell shock is exploited is really simple. I mean, you're basically like passing it some crap and then a shell command, like, W get something and then run that something, right? It's not necessarily impossible to think that somebody has a script for whatever reason, parses out crap at the beginning and end, and let's say fetches web pages that are refers or what have you, and to do some kind of metrics on referring pages or whatever, and an attacker. And one of the ways this was being attacked, people were changing their user agent strings and their refer strings and whatnot in their web browsers, and that was a relatively easy way to trigger the exploit. And I just have to wonder if they wrote maybe the most god-awful script that actually did do this, but in a very unintended way that could conceivably use, the what looked like a shell shock type thing. Now, totally hypothetical and speculatory on my part, but I just want to point out that it's not out of the realm of possibility that Yahoo is actually telling the truth, right? Yeah, it is kind of a crazy story on the surface, but at the same time, I'm not sure that this Mr. Hall actually has all of his ducks in a row either.
I could tell you're not a big fan of Mr. Hall.
I don't know him from anything. It's just
But based on the way he's been representing himself, you
yes,
feel his credibility may be suspect.
Yes, I think he could have approached this in a much more sane manner that would have actually made him look much better than he does right now.
Fair enough. I think the Yahoo version of the story is entirely plausible.
Absolutely.
Right? So they have, their version is, it was in essence shell shock, but that they had mutated their exploit, quote, likely with the goal of bypassing ITS, IDP and or WAF filters, end quote, and that this mutation happened to fit exactly a command injection bug in a monitoring script that they were running. Well, if you look at the way shell shock works, as you were just talking about, sure, that fits very nicely into the concept of not a buffer overflow per se, but a command overflow where your script is only expecting certain amount of input. And when people write scripts, they're often lazy, right? They're not doing a lot of hardening of scripts to protect against malicious activity. They just need to do X, Y, Z and give them the data they need. So I think it's entirely plausible that this could be a variation, if you will, on shell shock. But it sounds so awfully similar to shell shock that it feels like they might be splitting hairs just a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that for me, the salient point is that it's entirely possible if Yahoo's version of the story is in fact true.
Why would they lie?
Well, that's I agree with you. They have nothing. They have very little to gain by lying, and in fact, I think they have a lot to lose by lying. And I think actually, my view is the path of least resistance would have just been to say, "Yep, it was shell shock," and move on. So it is actually very surprising to me that they actually said anything at all.
Well, he has an interesting point in here too. so I'm going to quote again from his post. And when I say his, I mean the CISO of Yahoo. As you can imagine, this episode caused some confusion in our team since the servers in question had been successfully patched twice immediately after the BAS issue became public. Once we ensured that the impacted servers were isolated from the network, we conducted a comprehensive trace of the attack code through our entire stack, which revealed the root cause, not shell shock. Now here's the point. Let this be a lesson defenders and attackers alike. Just because the exploit code works doesn't mean it triggered the bug you expected.
Yes, that was where I was going. Is that it's very likely, if their version of reality is true, that the attempt to exploit the shell shock vulnerability instead exploited this other stupid, arguably far worse, far more boneheaded vulnerability in just a very coincidental way. And again, to me, it seems like I would have just said, yeah, it was shell shock and moved on. But,
well, accuracy counts for something, right? And
absolutely.
I do think it's an interesting point. We can't make assumptions just because certain exploit code works. It's often worth looking at why it works.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't know. I am certainly no fan of Yahoo or Yahoo fanboy in any sense of the word, but this just reads as plausible to me. I don't see the upside of any other reason to make up such an interesting, convoluted story.
Yeah, right. And I think when you start to think about it in context, it isn't quite as far-fetched as it might otherwise seem. And I think that's, for me, what I hope people take away. What will be really interesting, and maybe Yahoo, if they want to do any face saving, will release, here's the logic flaw that we saw. That and maybe that would be helpful to other people in the future.
Indeed.
All right, so yeah, that was just a crazy thing, and it continues to unfold on many different social media outlets, even as we speak.
Because we love drama in the InfoSec community.
Totally. And by the way, I don't have anything against this, this guy, Mr. Hall. I just really think he would have done better approaching this in a different way. That's all. So anyhow, moving on, our next story comes from the Register, and the title is J.P. Morgan Cyber Heist. And by the way, I just want to point out, cyber heist is in all capitals, so you know it's very serious. 9 U.S. financial firms snared by Russian hackers, says report. So the story here is, back a couple of months ago, there was a whole bunch of hoopla about J.P. Morgan being breached, and there were some rumors about other financial companies being breached, and then it kind of went dead until last week when J.P. Morgan filed a report, and they claimed that 83 million the data for 83 million households and businesses. There's really no clarity on how many businesses versus household, but I did look up. There are only 122 million households in the U.S. as of 2013. So, maybe over half of all U.S. households are impacted by this. That's a little crazy. But anyhow, apparently the kinds of information that was stolen were contact information. So names, mailing addresses, email addresses, that sort of thing. But no account or financial information was allegedly stolen. So one of the interesting things I found in here, and by the way, the details are very sparse, but one interesting little tidbit was apparently the attackers stole a file that contained a list of all applications that JP Morgan uses in their environment. And I don't know if that was some application whitelisting configuration file or, some kind of a procurement inventory file or what, but kind of interesting. And the story goes on to say that the same attackers breached, allegedly, 9 other unnamed U.S. financial companies, and that they are pointing the finger at some Russian hackers who have, quote, loose connections to Vladimir Putin, and the assertion is that this is some kind of retribution for the U.S. sanctions on Russia for the what's going on in the Ukraine. So, if that, by the way, if that was in fact retaliation, it was kind of lame.
Well, and it came from an unnamed senior intelligence official. So that's
totally solid.
Clearly solid info. And, we have such good luck with attribution. We are nearly 8% accurate in our attribution.
Totally. We got a story coming up about that in a minute.
It's true. So it's interesting because I'm not downplaying this, but a lot of the information they got is kind of, hey, I looked you up in Yellow Pages.
Yeah, there was some, and by the way, I tried chasing this down and I failed miserably. I saw on Twitter there was a loose assertion that the JP Morgan thing started with a phishing attack, and I was not able to find any further corroboration about that story. However, it kind of makes sense, but it differs very dramatically from the original story that they got in through some web application, and then infected or compromised. I think they said 90 servers.
Once again, we have no good data here to really dig into, so I guess we'll have to keep an eye on it. But
yep,
it is interesting they got a list of every application and program deployed.
There was a comment in here. Let's see. The NYT said the hackers can cross-check with known or new vulnerabilities in each system in a search for a backdoor entry. And then they say, this next comment really kind of hurt my head. Replacing those programs will take time and cost big bucks, apparently.
Because that's your only reaction?
So
is immediately replace all the programs?
Yeah, so what are you going to do about Microsoft Office?
Well, clearly you're going to have to go to OpenOffice.
Totally.
Who wouldn't? I mean,
it's a bad idea. I did it. I tried it. It's a bad idea.
But it's open source, man.
It's a bad idea. Just telling you.
Yeah, and also, that's just an ignorant statement for this reporter to make. Maybe you might care, if these were sort of public-facing entities and you had a really old, out-of-date version of something that couldn't be gleaned from reconnaissance anyway. I don't know. But replacing WinZip on your secretary's desktop is not necessary in this case.
Yeah, it's not. Obviously, there was no context about what, why they would have said such a thing, and I can't imagine that the reporter came up with that thought on their own, right?
Well, clearly they interviewed Gregory Evans. He's just an uncredited source.
Oh, dang! You went there, didn't you? Wow. Yeah, that could be.
If anybody doesn't get that reference, just Google.
Yeah.
Do some Googling.
Yeah.
Because that's as far as I'm going to go.
Gregory Evans charlatan is the Google term you want to look up, by the way. And
that's not his last name. That's just a title.
It'll just get you into the right neighborhood.
Yes.
On Google. So anyway, boy, we're like making friends and influencing people tonight, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's, again, I don't even think we gave our disclaimer, which is that these are the thoughts of only us and not our employers, past, present, or future. But now it's probably a good time to throw that in there.
That's a very good point.
However, if you do like our thoughts and want to be our future employers, feel free to send us on marked bills and we'll talk.
Excellent point. So, moving on to our next story. This comes from Naked Security, and the title is Bad USB. Now with do-it-yourself instructions. So, back in, I think it was, July or August, during Black Hat, I think it was, a couple of researchers talked about their discovery that they could reprogram the microcontroller contained in most every USB device. And once you do that, you can't see it, you can't clean it. It's not a virus, right? It basically changes the behavior of the device and turns it into an HID type device, and you can program it to do whatever you like. And so at the time, the researchers put up some pretty flashy video demonstrations of this thing changing DNS settings and adding virtual adapters and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Well, apparently I guess it was at DerbyCon, in fact, some different researchers, essentially followed in their footsteps, created their own version, and released proof of concept code. So you too can create your very own bad USB device, which is fantastic. And all I could think of is it's like time to party like it's 1995 when we had to worry about autorun.
Clearly. And I'm guessing, by the way, this is a nod. The name is a nod to Bad BIOS.
Oh, totally.
So.
Totally.
Bad BIOS lives on in spirit.
Well, I mentioned, I theorized this at the time, but we are incrementally making our way towards the entire feature set of Bad BIOS.
If you believe it didn't already exist then.
Well, true. That's true. Whether or not it did exist, we're incrementally making our way there.
I am a Bad BIOS truther.
Great. Great. But
I'm gonna put up a 4-hour-long YouTube documentary proving, without a shadow of a doubt, with blurry pictures and really bad evidence.
Will you have interviews?
I will, with people blacked out and voice modulated, about how Bad BIOS is actual real and it was a plot by the government.
That's fantastic. I can't wait to see it.
And that they, use explosives on Building 7. So, all that being said,
yes,
I completely derailed your topic.
I don't even know where to take it now.
So, do we just turn off USB?
Well, I was thinking about that, and there's not a great story here. I mean, you can't disable autorun anymore. The only thing I can come up with, and I don't think there are easy ways to do this. So I think that this is now, we're going to have to see some innovation catch up to this problem here. Basically, you're going to have to enforce the kind of device, right? So if you plug in a USB stick, flash drive, and it presents itself to the operating system as a human interface device, you're going to have to, there's going to have to be some kind of prompt that pops up and says, is this thing, before it allows it, that device to interact with your operating system, it's going to say, is this thing really a keyboard? Or is it really a mouse? Or, that sort of thing.
And grandma's going to click yes.
Well, I don't know what else to do. There aren't any other good options.
I would be curious. There are a number of enterprise-wide software that control USB read-writes and USB ports and the type of devices that can be plugged into USB. I'd be really curious if this is low enough layer that it gets around those pieces of control software. I'm not going to throw any vendors out there, but there are ones out there that can say things like only a Kingston 16 gig model XYZ can actually be accessed.
Right.
And, you can read from it, but you can't write to it and stuff like that. Sometimes it's wrapped in the DLP, sometimes it's just wrapped in device control software. But I'd be curious how well those sorts of software dealt with something like this. And I don't know, it may be too low level because that USB stick being plugged in, executing the microcode is pretty low level to the system. And,
yeah, I think that is the very problem that we're going to have is, hypothetically, this is essentially emulating a keyboard now. that your USB device, you've hijacked the microcontroller and you've made it start thinking that it is a keyboard, and you are programming it with, the ability to run some essentially macros. So you could think about it, right? You could theoretically, hypothetically plug this in before boot. And if you knew, if it knew how to interact with BIOS, it's very low level. There isn't, I don't think there's a good opportunity as things are currently designed to intercept that. Now, I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong if I am. But I think this is going to start requiring some innovation, maybe at the Windows and operating system level to control. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah,
I'm sure certain vendor product management folks are going, what can we do to put out a press release that we stop this?
Yeah, I saw some of the people I follow on Twitter were maniacally laughing. Just ordered another 10 USBs. I fixed them and now I'm sending them back.
Ouch.
Yeah. It's a brave new world we live in. All right, so our last story tonight comes from CSO Online, and the title here is Threat Intelligence Firm Mistakes Research for Nation-State Attack. This story resonated with me, and when you send it to me, I get really angry, like an angry drunk, when I see a lot of these attribution stories, because I really feel like people don't actually know who the hell they're tracking, right? They're making an educated guess, and then that educated guess gets codified in a report that says, yes, it was absolutely Russia, or it was absolutely China. And, in this case, it was absolutely a nation state that was scanning for ICS devices, except it wasn't. It was actually a digital bond researcher working out of freaking Chattanooga. Trying to gather data for a presentation at DerbyCon.
Oops.
So, yeah. Just yeah. The company's name, by the way, is ThreatStream, and they came up with this report. They essentially run a network of honeypots that emulate ICS devices, industrial control systems, and apparently they just intake scans and things like that, and so they published this report. Bloomberg picked up the report, ran their own piece on it, and after some further investigation, it turns out that at least one of the actors was in fact a security researcher and not a nation state trying to hack the water plants of the world.
But Jerry, they filtered out all known research servers that we knew of for this story.
What can you do? I mean, if they said it, clearly this is all wrong.
I mean, how clearly the researcher didn't fill out the appropriate change control paperwork.
Oh, that's a good point. He probably only filled it out twice instead of in triplicate. Didn't sign the right box.
But this is such a typical problem that we're running into now with threat intel feeds.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring this up. I think one of the problems I see with threat intelligence and the concept of attribution is there is, for the most part, I mean, obviously there are outliers and this is not always the rule, right? There is a general, what I interpret to be assumption or understanding that certain kinds of actors are required. You require certain kinds of actors to execute certain kinds of attacks. And, the reality is that a lot of this stuff is becoming so commoditized. The attack techniques and the tools and whatnot are becoming so commoditized that anybody can do it. Not necessarily anybody, right? But many people. It doesn't take the Syrian Electronic Army to pull off the shenanigans they do. It doesn't take, the comment crew to pull off the kinds of things they do. I'm not disagreeing that those groups exist. I am saying that many other less sophisticated people could do the same thing to the same ends, and probably even make it look like it was, somebody else. So,
well, clearly what they should be doing is publishing the IP addresses of their honeypots so researchers would not scan them. That's
probably, yes. God, this drives me crazy.
Well, this reminds me so much of the early days of the internet, when drops on firewall logs were considered attacks and were counted as such.
Oh, yes. The good old days.
We blocked 200,000 attack probes this week alone.
And then it was spams.
Right. And I remember the early days of the military coming out with these outrageous attacks, statistics.
They're counting port scans as attacks, right?
Right. And I kind of think that's where we're at in terms of some of these threat intelligence feeds. They can't easily discriminate between actual, legitimate, malicious activity and researchers and testers. And I don't think it's on the research team or the testers or whatever to make it painfully obvious that they're a research team. Our good buddy Rob Graham does a lot of stuff with his mass scan, and he's extremely public about it and is very vocal and does a lot of stuff to tag his scans with information about what they are and goes out of his way to make very sure people know what it is that's scanning them. And he still gets tons of people getting upset that they think that he's sending malicious activity at them. So at the end of the day, it's on the threat intelligence vendors to vet their streams of information as accurate and useful. And this is one of those that really makes me think that we are in the infancy of the threat intelligence kind of business right now. And there's going to be a lot of this sort of snake oil out there with the best of intentions by these vendors, but they're just not very mature yet. And they need to be.
Yeah, I think you hit on the nail on the head there. By the way, I don't know what to say. I think you just called Rob Graham a nation state.
Oh, I did. He actually seceded his little house, just like that episode of, I think, The Simpsons, or it might have been Family Guy. But yeah, he is his own nation state.
Wow.
Rob Grahamia.
So, I think the takeaway there for me is, be skeptical. Again, I think, this kind of comes back to the broader problem of attribution and paying attention to more about what people are doing and less about who they are. Because again, it's on the internet, you can be just about anybody you want to be. And, again, I think capabilities are becoming so abstracted that using that as some kind of a reliable indicator or a factor in your response is probably only going to, at least in the long term, lead to sadness and heartache. maybe even a heart bleed.
And clearly, I won't be getting any job offers from threat intelligence firms.
Or maybe we could make it better.
We could try. We could certainly try.
That's true. Money helps.
Bidding begins at $400,000 a year each.
Sounds like a plan. And bring it on.
We'll be doing bids in $10,000 increments.
Bring it on. All right. Well, that is the.
Wait. Before we go, there's an important announcement.
Oh, go ahead.
We do have a new tool to introduce. It is Lacie, the breach detection dog.
Oh, my God. I'm sorry for everyone. You can just hit stop now on your player. But yeah, I did get a puppy. I've been, for the past several decades, I've been a cat person, and I was thrust into dog ownership very abruptly, and I went into it willingly, not saying that I didn't, but dogs, by the way, are like mouse with big pointy teeth on legs that run around and they eat everything. And so we're trying to figure out how can we turn this into a security tool. And the best I can think of is, I came up with the idea of the anti-APT wire cutters. And so I'm thinking that I can, turn this whole thing into, an anti-APT dog, right? So the idea is you point it at the cable where the APTs are emanating from, and the dog chews through it. No more APT.
Right. So an on-demand air gap.
Bingo.
And I think there's a company that also is exploring this, APT Defender, that you can hit up at aptdefender.com, that may be able to cross-market with us on this concept.
That's a great idea. And by the way, they have certifications, I think, right?
They do. And
I've actually been thinking about taking one of those certifications. They look really good, and I definitely advise everybody to take a look at that website and explore some certification and developing your career potential.
It's true. So I think we could develop Lacie, though, into being able to bark whenever a major breach is happening.
I like it, which would basically be all the time, right?
Well, she lives with you, not me.
Great. So with that, I think we're going to call it a night, because I'm getting frantically texted by my wife. Apparently the dog is eating the furniture or something.
I'm sorry to completely derail the end of the show, but
nope. Any hate mail should go to Andy Kallet. It's Kal. Yeah. Anyway, if you like the show, send us. Actually, if you don't like the show, have any feedback, don't like the show, ideas, whatever, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. If you have a desire to follow us on Twitter, Mr. Kallet is at Lurg. I'm at Malicious Link. The show's at DefensiveSec. You can find back episodes, links to the show notes and everything else on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. I will plead one more time for feedback on iTunes. It's like our internet points. We love it. Thank you very much to those who have given us feedback. And hopefully, if you haven't, you will consider it. And with that, we'll talk again next week. Have a great one. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.